Hey everybody, welcome to Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain. We got a great show for you tonight. As always, make sure you chime in and tell me hello. Let me know where you're tuning in from in the world. If you've got questions you want me to answer tonight, get those in early. We'll do my best. I'll do my best to get those answered for you. And tonight we're going to be covering the primary gluten-free diet myths. So stay with me at the very end. We're going to talk about strategies if you've gone gluten-free to overcome autoimmune disease if you're still struggling. So if that sounds like you, number one, you're in the right place, but number two, stick with me to the very end because we're going to dive in to all those strategies. So let's get to it. Gluten-free diet myths. Myth number one, okay, is that gluten-free diets cause malnutrition. Now, there's a nuance to this in this myth. So it's not really that gluten-free diets cause malnutrition. It's how people actually do it. There's two types, or two ways, I should say, that you can go gluten-free. There's traditional, and then there's what we call the true gluten-free diet. Okay, so traditional versus the true gluten-free diet. They're not the same thing. If you're following a traditional gluten-free diet, which is wheat, barley, rye free, and you're going to the grocery food aisle and you're buying all the junk food, you're buying the processed corn, the processed rice, based foods that are labeled gluten-free, yes, this is true. Gluten-free diets do cause malnutrition. However, if you're following a true gluten-free diet, this type of diet does not cause malnutrition. And so it's important to make that differentiation because many of you probably are even wondering, what's he talking about, traditional gluten-free diet versus true gluten-free diet? If you don't know, make sure you go watch my master class. You can go check that out at glutenology.net. It's a 14-hour master class, everything you wish you would have ever known about the gluten-free diet before starting it. But true gluten-free diet does not cause malnutrition. Now, as far as nutritional status goes, I'm going to show you some research that was published. You can see down here, this was published in the journal Nutrients. It was a review on gluten-free diets, gaps and needs for a healthier diet. So here's what they found. At time of diagnosis, meaning when somebody's diagnosed with gluten sensitivity, these were the deficiencies that were common, according to this review, according to these reviewers. So iron deficiency. Let's change our color here. Okay, so iron deficiency, calcium, zinc, B12 and folate, vitamins A, D, E, and K. Those are your fat-soluble vitamins. They also found excess fat intake and secondary lactose intolerance. Now, if you don't know what that is, that means eating dairy causes gas, bloating, intestinal problems. The secondary lactose intolerance is caused by gluten damaging the cells in the stomach, not in the stomach, in the GI tract, that produce the enzyme lactase that breaks down lactose. So that's why it's called secondary lactose intolerance, because it's caused by gluten-induced damage. So these were very, very common deficiencies at the time of diagnosis. Now, this doesn't really 100% match everybody. I want to be clear. This is kind of a general consensus overall in the research that's been done on this topic. Now, if we look at over here, nutritional status during adherence to a gluten-free diet. So this is people following a gluten-free diet. Here's what they found again in a review of the literature. Same things, right? So we see some consistencies: iron and calcium, okay, B12 and folate, vitamin D. We see excess fat, so that didn't change, right? Americans love their fat. We see other things, though, in the adherence to the gluten-free diet. We see a selenium and a zinc and a magnesium deficit. We see vitamin C, okay? We see excess sugar, and we see dietary fiber. That DF stands for fiber, being too low. So, okay, this is what's found when people aren't gluten-free. This is what they found when people were following a gluten-free diet. Now, it's very important to note, because if we go back to this myth, what did we say? We said, myth number one, gluten-free diet causes malnutrition. And I said, true, but also false. A traditional gluten-free diet causes malnutrition. A true gluten-free diet does not. what we're talking about in this research study, in this summary, okay, in people adhering to a gluten-free diet, this is, let's change that color, make it better, easier to read here. That's not better. Here we go, black will work. So this is people following traditional gluten-free diet. And traditional gluten-free diet, it's that wheat, barley, rye free diet. But these people, what are they doing? They're eating processed, highly processed foods. This is why they have excess sugar. This is why they talk about excess fat as well. A lot of that fat is what's been found to be hydrogenated fat. Now, you don't get hydrogenated fat in nature. You only get hydrogenated fat when you eat junk food that's processed fat, fat that's been hydrogenated, forced hydrogen into it. And when you force hydrogen into fat, that's what makes it thick. Like, you know, if you've ever baked with Crisco, that thick fat, that saturated fat, if you will, that's hydrogenated. So they find hydrogenated and sugar, which are only found, again, in this processed junk food. They also found selenium, zinc, and magnesium, also notoriously low in junk food. Remember, these three, very low when you're eating heavy processed. So what they found, it's not that the gluten-free diet per se creates malnutrition. It's that the processed gluten-free diet that's full of foods that contain junk, that contain poor nutrient density. Corn and rice are not good for us. Not in the sense that they're nutrient-dense foods. They're very nutrient-poor foods. And so when you replace all the things that you used to eat, you know, what you're doing is you're just trading, okay, the wheat, the barley, and the rye for the processed corn and rice. That's what most people do, right? You know, that's what most people do. And so doing that, the other thing now people are doing is the non-grains like tapioca. They're replacing the things that used to contain wheat with tapioca or cassava flours. And so these types of flours are high glycemic, high sugar. A lot of times they're mixed with fat. They're not super nutritionally dense. And so what you get is you get a poor nutritional density, right? The diet itself is so processed, there's not a lot of nutrients in it. And so you get nutritional deficit caused, again, not by a true gluten-free diet, but by a traditional, highly processed gluten-free diet. And so when a doctor says going gluten-free is dangerous, this is just basically what this is an admission, if you will, of that doctor's ignorance with not differentiating, because you can eat gluten-free, you can eat grain-free and have a very nutritionally dense diet, right? What are we talking about? Meats, vegetables, nuts, fruits, very nutritionally dense food. But if you travel to the gluten-free grocery store or the gluten-free food aisle in the grocery store and you just start picking up box garbage, then your diet is going to be poor. Now, that is not necessarily a gluten-free diet. That's a high-processed food diet that doesn't contain wheat, barley, and rye. And again, it's important to understand the definitional differences. So gluten-free diets don't cause malnutrition. Highly processed food diets do. All right, let's talk about myth number 2. Gluten-free diets are only for those with celiac disease. How many of you have heard, raise your hand if you've ever heard somebody say, gluten-free diet is only for celiacs and it's dangerous. I actually hear people say it's dangerous for everyone else. Raise your hand, chime in and let me know if you've heard that. If you've heard somebody, and I hear this all the time from the celiac community, these people, a lot of them unfortunately own their celiac disease. They call it myceliacs. And they take like pride and ownership. And you know, you don't have to have celiac disease if you just change your diet. There should be no pride of ownership of illness anyway. Like that's just a completely, it's an unfortunate way to look at things. So they tell you that it's dangerous, and this is a psychological component. They tell you it's dangerous because more than anything, they want to feel special. Special in misery. Right? Because they are restricting their diet, they're avoiding wheat, barley, and rye. They're miserable doing it. and they want to because they're miserable doing it, they want to feel special in the doing of it. Now, I'm not saying this about everyone with celiac disease, so if you're tuning in and you're listening to this show and you're like, well, I have celiac disease, and I don't feel that way. This is not a blanket statement for everybody, but you'll hear this type of statement come from a lot of people with celiac disease. You'll also hear this statement come from a lot of doctors who are untrained in nutrition, is they'll say that the gluten-free diet is dangerous, and they'll say it that it's dangerous. Again, going back to this, myth number one, they'll say it's dangerous because their claim is that a gluten-free diet causes malnutrition, and that's why they're making that claim that it's dangerous. But as I've shown and broke it down here, gluten-free diet is not dangerous. A highly processed refined corn and rice substitute diet is. So again, it's all about differentiation. So let's talk about why this myth number two is a myth beyond that. So only those with celiac should avoid gluten. Well, let me pull up a diagram here and show you why that's false. So this is out of the journal Food Science and Human Wellness. And so this is just a synopsis of the symptoms that people with celiac disease and non-celiac gluten sensitivity develop. Now, I want you to pay close attention here. We have this diagram in the middle, and you can see over here on the left-hand side, we've got, again, gastrointestinal manifestations. This is celiac, right? So typically, celiac is associated with diarrhea, vomiting, distended abdomen, failure to thrive. This is in kids, failure to thrive. That means they're not growing. They're failing to thrive. They're failing to grow. This is the typical celiac. Now, we can also get pain, GI pain, okay, is also a common manifestation over here. But this is, again, your classic celiac disease. Now, here's what I want you to understand. There's a term called non-celiac gluten sensitivity, okay? Non-celiac. This is celiac. Non-celiac gluten sensitivity. Let that sink in for a minute. What does that mean? That means a person can still be gluten sensitive even though they don't have celiac disease. Now, of the population in the United States, and this is arguably true of most major industrial countries, 1% of the population, about 1%, has gluten sensitivity to the point that develop celiac disease. 7% have non-celiac gluten sensitivity. So people with non-celiac gluten sensitivity outnumber people with celiac disease sevenfold, 7 times the quantity. And this is important to understand. And these over here on this side of the diagram are many of the symptoms that people with non-celiac gluten sensitivity manifest with. You can see, and there's a lot of them. Look at all the different symptoms, neurological symptoms, psychiatric manifestations. Look what we know. And this has all been studied. This has all been published, folks, in the medical literature. So this is not anecdote. Epilepsy, seizure disorder, peripheral neuropathy, numbness and tingling or pain in the hands or feet. Inflammatory myopathies. This is muscle pain. So if you struggle with muscle pain and you don't know why, then myopathy, that's what your doctor might cause it, muscle pain. Myelopathies, this is spinal cord damage to the spinal cord directly leading to diseases of the spinal cord. Gluten encephalopathy, this is swelling of the brain induced by gluten. And we have diseases like cerebellar ataxia, which is loss of balance or position sense, and then schizophrenia. And we could actually add here bipolar disease, and we could add depression, clinical depression, all been linked. Neurological symptoms or manifestations of gluten exposure. Then we have oral and mucocutaneous, which is in the mouth, right? And we talked about this just a few weeks ago, the oral symptoms, right? And facial manifestations. So dental enamel defects, Sjogren's disease, which causes a drying of the mouth, a drying of the eyes because it's an autoimmune disease that affects the glands that produce saliva, and the larger than normal forehead. We got dermatological skin, okay, manifestations, vitiligo, psoriasis, alopecia areata, which is hair loss. Psoriasis is skin inflammation, vitiligo. Okay, you can add to this list eczema. Okay, so those of you struggling with eczema, you can put that down on the list as well. And then hematological manifestations. These are manifestations in your blood. Hematological is blood. So anemias, megaloblastic anemia, that's large cell large cell anemia. Thrombocytosis, which is effective of the platelets, and then thrombocytopenia, which is low levels of platelets, leukopenia, which is low levels of leukocytes or white blood cells, and thrombolism, which is excessive clotting, and then bleeding tendency and lymphoma. These are all, again, lymphoma is a type of cancer. It can kill you. This is a manifestation of gluten exposure without celiac disease. And then liver manifestations, hepatic manifestations, cirrhosis, biliary cirrhosis, primary sclerosing cholangitis, which is basically gallbladder inflammation, autoimmune hepatitis, which is an autoimmune reaction in your liver causing inflammation, hemochromatosis, which is excessive iron overload, and then fatty liver disease can develop, including non-alcoholic fatty liver. So it's not, again, this is not alcohol-inducing fatty liver, and then hepatic malignancies and liver failure. So we know gluten can really, really hammer the liver. Now, we could go on and on. These are just some common ones that this particular research study was overviewing. We could talk about kidney dysfunction. We could talk about osteoporosis being linked to gluten sensitivity. There are a number of other manifestations. This is not comprehensive, but I wanted to show this to you because, again, so many people say if you don't have celiac disease, you have no reason to go gluten-free. Well, what if you have all of these problems or one of these problems? These are pretty bad too. A lot of people will say celiac is the worst one. I would say I would rather not have lymphoma. Lymphoma can kill you. Celiac can kill you. Which disease would you like today that could possibly kill you? That's not a fair question to ask of anyone. So my point is, if somebody's trying to tell you that gluten-free diets are only for celiac disease, and you see this on the news, you hear it from doctors, you hear it from people with celiac disease, it's because they're misinformed, miseducated, and they're spreading deception, and they're spreading lies, and they're contributing, in my opinion, they're contributing to manslaughter because they're actually harming people without the intent of harming them. Okay, myth number 3, gluten-free foods are healthier than gluten-containing counterparts. Now, we alluded to this a moment ago when we were talking about, the traditional versus the true gluten-free diet, right? And we said that true gluten-free diets, which are diets of whole, healthy, good food, versus traditional, which is highly processed. Okay, again, highly processed food. Most people, when they see it on the package, you see this woman here in the picture, this is gluten-free, so she's smiling, right? Big old smile. She's smiling because she thinks it's healthier, it's gluten-free. Okay, let me just draw your attention back to a point in time about 15 years ago. If you remember the war on fat, right? Everything was fat-free. Everything was fat-free. And so what did food manufacturers started to do? They removed fat from the foods and they added sugar to foods. And so they started, instead of saying it's gluten-free, now we're saying it's fat-free. Was that good for us? No. It's what we call window dressing. This is what marketers do. They try to confuse you. They try to put healthy quotes on a package to delineate that something might be healthier, right? So that they put it in your mind that it's healthier so you'll buy more of it. But packaged gluten-free food, for the most part, most of it is junk food. There are exceptions to the rule, but most of it is just highly processed food full of either corn, rice, starch, with poor nutrient density. Okay, now on top of that, these foods are high in hydrogenated fat. Important that you understand hydrogenated fat, and they're high in sugar. That's not good for you. None of these things are good for you, right? So if you have it in your mind that just because the label says gluten-free, that somehow that magically transforms the ingredients of that package into something that might be healthy for you, you need to learn how to read the label. Label reading is key. So if it comes in a package and it says gluten-free, you can't just assume that it's gluten-free. You got to read the label. Look at what's in it. Identify what's in your food. Don't just trust that GF on the label is somehow going to make that food healthy. Now, let's look at, this is a study recently published by a good friend of mine, Tom O'Brien. Those of you who've been following me for a while might also know Tom O'Brien, Dr. O'Brien. Navigating the gluten-free boom, the dark side of the gluten-free diet. Now, this is kind of research that Tom and Dr. Lerner and Dr. Matthias all put together on what we see in terms of gluten-free diets that are high in processed food. Again, keyword, high in processed food. We see nutrient deficiencies in iron, calcium, sodium, vitamins D, C, A, E, B vitamins, that includes vitamin B12, thiamine, which is B1, riboflavin, which is riboflavin, which is B2, niacin, which is B3, folate, which is B9, zinc, magnesium, selenium. It's low in fiber. It's low in essential amino acids, which are important for growth and regulation, and it's low in gamma-linolenic acid. So poor in these things. Okay, here we found in this publication that gluten-free diets of processed food contain excessive quantities of saturated fat, sugar, and total calories. Okay. We also found that they were high in omega-6 fatty acids, higher in arachidonic acid and docosahexaenoic acid ratio, meaning, I don't know if you guys know what that is, but DHA, docosahexaenoic acid, is an omega-3 that feeds the brain. It's what I like to call brain fat. It's the stuff that makes your white matter, very important for the prevention, if you will, very important for maintenance of brain and cognitive function, especially as we age. We're seeing a lot of elderly with Alzheimer's being low in DHA. Well, gluten-free foods are very low in DHA, and they're high in arachidonic acid, AA. And arachidonic acid is a type of fat that helps trigger an inflammatory response. So when you have a diet that's low in DHA and high in arachidonic acid, you've got kind of this masterful recipe of fat-induced inflammation. And of course, inflammation, depending on where it's happening, if it's happening in your brain, that can create problems with thought and cognitive function. If it's happening in your joints, it can create pain, etc. They also found that the gluten-free diet, as done with processed food, is higher in pro-inflammatory fatty acids. So again, we're talking about a processed gluten-free diet. We're not talking about a true gluten-free diet, which is a healthy gluten-free diet. These things here. They also found that a processed food gluten-free diet was high in heavy metals like arsenic, mercury, lead, and cadmium. This is especially true because of rice. Rice pulls heavy toxic metals out of the soil really well, and a lot of the rice that's been researched and measured has high levels of heavy metal. We also know that gluten-free foods contain high levels of food additives and enzymes like microbial transglutaminase, otherwise known as meat glue. Now, you've heard me talk about meat glue a number of times because meat glue can mimic, and that's what we're finding, it mimics gluten. So if you're gluten sensitive and you're eating a gluten-free food that has lots of meat glue used in the processing, you actually can react to that food the same way you might react to gluten. And so again, that's not a healthy food for you. So those of you maybe that are eating all this junk food that says it's gluten-free and you're still struggling, take note of what I'm saying tonight. Take note of what I'm teaching you, because if you do and you move away from this stuff, you're going to move away from toxic metals, you're going to move away from toxic food additives, you're going to move away from a poor omega-3 fatty acid ratio, you're going to move away from excessive sugar, excessive calories, and you're going to move into more nutritional density into your diet. So then we got this other review here. This was published in Clinical Nutrition in 2016. Results: gluten-free diet was found to be poor in fiber, particularly because of the necessary avoidance of several kinds of foods that are naturally rich in fiber. Remember, grain is rich in fiber. There's no doubt. And is fiber good for us? Yes, it is. Fiber is very good for us. A lot of research behind the importance of getting adequate dietary fiber. Now, that being said, if you're gluten sensitive, you can't get that fiber from grain. And so when you go grain-free, gluten-free, if you don't have another source for fiber coming into your diet, then this is why, if you look over here and what they were pointing out, and what we pointed out, you can see here, it's fibers here, right? Fibers here. And I showed you another study earlier that showed that people that followed that gluten-free diet, who going to that gluten-free aisle in the grocery store, those individuals, again, here we go, right? Low dietary fiber intake. So this is a problem because when you cut grain out, grain is one of the primary sources in the human diet for most people of fiber. And so if you're cutting that grain out and you don't have a strategy for fiber in your diet, it can actually end up creating microbiome changes. Okay, so this is where if you follow a true gluten-free diet, what are you getting? What's different about a true gluten-free diet versus the traditional gluten-free diet? Well, one of the things that a true gluten-free diet, it has lots of vegetable fiber. That is, if you can tolerate it. Some of you can't. It also has things like pectin, and it has foods that are basically that are fermented. Fermented vegetable, fermented foods that are rich in natural probiotics that help restore the natural probiotic levels in your GI tract. So true gluten-free diet contains, again, lots of vegetable options. Nuts contain some fiber as well. So there are two types of seeds that actually are pretty rich in fiber. Chia and flax are options for good fiber. Broccoli sprouts are an option for good fiber. So there's a lot of options for fiber from vegetables, from nuts, and from chia, flax, etc., fermented foods. And what happens is most people, when you go traditionally gluten-free, packaged processed foods doesn't really contain these things, right? Some do, but not to any great degree. The other places you can get fiber, I say, some of you don't tolerate broccoli, or some of you don't tolerate goitrogenic or foods like cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, those types of cruciferous foods. So, you might need to do things like beetroot or other root vegetables to get some fiber. Root vegetables are a great source of fiber as well. But again, non-processed. So we're talking about from the real food itself, not the food that's been cooked down, infinitely been stripped of nutrients and then added to processed or packaged foods. That's not going to get you anywhere. That's going to get you right here in this place. Deficient, toxic, and fatty acid ratio imbalanced. So remember those differences, because it's not the gluten-free diet. It's how people choose to define their personal gluten-free diet. So remember, a gluten-free diet can be good for you, but it can also be very, very bad for you, depending on how you choose to go and embark upon a gluten-free diet. All right, let's cover myth number 4, which is one of my favorite, and that's that a gluten-free diet is a cure-all for all diseases, for all disease. It's not. I think it's important to understand that gluten has, and we know this in medical literature, there are over 100 forms of disease that we know gluten can contribute to. We know gluten can exacerbate, and many of them we know gluten can worsen. But that doesn't mean, even that being said, it doesn't make gluten a cure-all. Okay, so if you struggle with, several forms of autoimmune disease and you go on a gluten-free diet and you still continue to struggle, gluten-free diet is a part of your recovery. It's a part of your strategy. But when it comes to overcoming disease, there's no such thing as waving a magic wand, right? We don't wave this magic wand. And it's like gluten is not, for most people, it's not a smoking gun that just kind of ends disease. You have to understand that disease is multifactorial. There's many different elements related to the development of a disease. And one of them is food related. So eating the wrong food contributes to disease. And gluten may be one of those things, but you could be sensitive or allergic to other foods. We also know that chemical exposure is a major problem in our society today, and we get chemicals from the food, right? So food can contain chemicals, pesticides, fungicides, like food that is not organic. We also know that food contains chemicals like food dyes, food additives, preservatives, and other things that can create problems. But we also know there's chemicals in the environment, things that you might get exposed to. Many of you subject yourself to chemicals in the form of medication, right? And ask your doctor, is there a side effect to the medication? The answer is 100% of the time going to be yes. In other words, you're trading symptoms for side effects, which are also symptoms, in the hope that the medicine is actually going to help alleviate your problem when the actual fact of the matter is the medicine's not going to really do anything unless you've got an antibiotic that you're taking for a bacterial infection. Medicines are not curative. They're designed to reduce your symptoms, but they're not really designed to cure why they're there. So medicines are forms of chemicals people subject themselves to every day. You've got chemicals in the water like chlorine. You've got fluoride that's also in the water, and bromine that's in the water. We've got chemicals in the air from petro, and you've got chemicals in plastic if you drink out of plastic or eat off of plastic. Like, there's chemicals all around us. These are both triggers. And so again, a gluten-free diet may be one of these foods, but if you're reacting to some of these other things, you're still not going to have a full potential for a full recovery. We also know there's nutritional deficit contributes to disease, nutritional deficiency or nutritional deficit. And nutritional deficit, so this could be vitamin deficiency or mineral deficiency. Minerals and vitamins are the essential compounds that allow your body to properly function. And if you're deficient in them, for example, vitamin C deficiency is a disease. It's called scurvy. Vitamin B1 deficiency is a disease. It's called beriberi. So we know nutrient deficits are a major cause, major contributor to people's manifestation of illness. And then we also know other triggers can be bacterial, infectious triggers. And really, let's not even use that word, because I don't even really think that's the right word to use. Let's refer to it not as infection, but as microbial imbalance. And microbial imbalance, it's not quite the same thing. An infection would be like somebody has, for example, a strep throat or staph infection. Microbial imbalance is when your microbiome is not optimized so that you can be defended from developing an infection. This is why so many people are getting sick right now. It's not necessarily because this virus is so dangerous. It really has more to do with they're so unhealthy in all these other ways. Then you add one more thing to the pool of problems, and it's the proverbial straw that breaks the camel's back. But that microbial imbalance is key. And what I was saying earlier about a gluten-free diet, a junk food gluten-free diet being low in fiber, guess what feeds our microbiome? Fiber. And so this is where a lot of you going gluten-free may continue to struggle, is that you've gone to packaged processed foods to replace the old packaged processed wheat, barley, and rye. You're diminished your fiber, and your microbiome has altered for the worse, right? And so that can create a problem. But it's in looking at these four elements. These are really, when you look at them, we're going to reverse order them, 1, 2, 3, 4, going upward, right? When you look at them in this way, this is, you go to the doctor and you're sick or you're ill, maybe you've gone gluten-free and gluten-free didn't solve it. You've got to look at these other things too. These are other choices. You also have to look at your stress, your sleep, your sunshine, your air and your water quality. Those are also important factors to help your body improve its ability to heal and repair itself. But these things can be measured. But just the problem is most doctors never even bother. And the reason why most doctors don't bother measuring any of those things is because they're not trained in nutrition. And that shouldn't be a newsflash, but to many of you it might be. Doctors get less than 7 hours of clinical training in nutrition during medical school curriculum, and that's appalling. By comparison, I've had over 10,000 hours in my own training. And, when you take a doctor who's supposed to understand biochemistry and supposed to understand how to get healthy, and they haven't had nutritional training, how could they possibly understand how to get healthy? And that's why we're in such a pickle, at least in the industrialized countries, is doctors don't teach people how to get healthy. They teach people how to mitigate symptoms with chemicals. And again, chemicals are number 3 on this list of potential triggers for illness. So if you've got any of these triggers, you're still struggling and you're gluten-free, but you have any of these triggers, you're going to continue to struggle until you ask some good doctor to sit down with you and start analyzing that biochemistry and helping you come to some kind of resolution or conclusion about what changes you need to make within your diet and lifestyle. Because that's where it's at. That's where disease is really best managed. It's managed by your own choices, by your own behavior. It's not managed by a magic pill that somebody pulls out of a pill bottle and says, here you go. We'll just say that's like sweeping dust under the rug. And because you can't see it, out of sight, out of mind, but it's still there, and the pile just gets bigger as time goes on. All right, so let's dive into your questions. Those of you who have questions, let's see here. So Janet, I have fatigue most every day at different times and sometimes have a second wind. I have been grain, dairy, and sugar-free for 2.5 years. So where's your question, Janet? Are you wondering why you might still be fatigued? That's what it sounds like your question is. And so I would say this, Janet, look very closely to nutritional deficiencies, to chemical in your environment, and to the potential to react to other foods. Because if your body is still fighting your diet and your nutritional status is still suffering, then your ability to make energy, the body's ability to make energy, is largely dependent on vitamins and minerals. And so if you don't know where you stand there, you could be tired, and that fatigue could persist. All right, so let's see. I like that. Hale says, this is a good topic. I live in a country, and it's recently become popular to do what's called the little gluten-free lifestyle because it will make you pretty. That's funny. I don't know what the little gluten-free, I mean, some people will, they'll dabble on gluten-free diets, like they'll do it for a little while, but it's the problem with gluten is 20 parts per million. One breadcrumb can cause inflammation for 2 months. So I would say the little gluten-free diet or lifestyle is not going to do you any favors. Does metabolism slow down when women reach perimenopause? What changes would I need to make to my diet and lifestyle when I reach menopause to prevent weight gain? I'm 40 now. I think more than anything else, we get into these habits of blaming certain aspects or components of aging. I'm getting older, my back hurts, or I'm getting older, my metabolism slowed down. And I think ultimately what happens is not that people are getting older. I think ultimately what happens is people neglect multiplied by time equals older faster. Now, older faster does not equal disease. It means really ultimately this right here. This is the variable you can change. If we're doing mathematics, we can't change halt or slow down time. So we can't change that as a variable. We can change, if we add one more word to that, self-neglect. Okay? So that lack of self-neglect over time equals aging gracefully. You're not going to stop the aging process. That's the human condition. It's called the oxygen paradox. But we can age gracefully. And a lot of doctors want to call age, right? They want to call that disease. They want to call that neglect over time disease, when in fact, this is pretty much reversible. We don't want you to get older faster. So what you asked, the question was, what can I do? Don't do this. So where do most people fail? Right here, especially when you're talking about weight gain. Right here, exercise. Over time, their exercise diminishes because pain increases. And we use this right here as an excuse to not do this, and it's a self-feeding cycle. So the number one thing you can do to make sure that you're not gaining a bunch of weight as you get older is, number one, keep all your organs, ladies. If a lot of times doctors want to remove your ovaries, for whatever problem that you might be having symptomatically, they think that's a solution, is removing the organ that God gave you. I think it's a travesty. But exercise is the biggest one. Exercise, not exercising adequately, or thinking that what they're doing is actually exercise. Like some people come to me sometimes and they say, well, I walk a couple miles a day. I'm sorry, that's not exercise. Exercise is movement. Exercise is more than walking, and this has to be part of who you are. And if it's not, then what happens is this vicious cycle. But the other thing that you can do, we call them the fundamentals. Get adequate sunshine without burning. Get adequate sleep. Eat real food that you're not sensitive or allergic to. Okay? And if you're doing these things and you're also doing your best to mitigate your stress, then aging gracefully is the outcome. If your self-neglect is in any of these areas, the outcome is older faster. And whatever that looks like for you, maybe it's pain, maybe it's weight gain, maybe it's chronic illness or disease. But that's what you need to be focused on. There's no magic pill to slow down the fact that you might, that some people want to have a tendency to gain weight. The magic pill is behavior change, and it's not necessarily behavior change, it's lifestyle change on a permanent level. Not, I'm going to do it for the next 6 weeks and hope for the best. It's, I need to do it consistently for the rest of my life, knowing that it's my obligation to take care of my temple, and that's your obligation. And if you take care of it, it will take care of you. And if you don't, it will break down on you slowly. Everybody else will call it aging, and hopefully, now you know better. Okay, let's see. Does gluten cause swelling of ankles and the feet, especially towards the end of the day? And what is the solution? So now, gluten can cause swelling. There's some research studies that gluten causes pericarditis, which is inflammation around the heart itself. So it can damage the heart. And when the heart's damaged, ankle swelling is a common side effect of that over time. But there are other things that can cause that as well. So if you're struggling with ankle swelling, there probably are a lot of different factors going on. Gluten could be one of them, but so could many other things. All right. Is ghee healthy if you have low thyroid? So Linda's asking that question, and then we have another question from Raza. Can I elaborate on dairy and problems it can create? So here's why I'm not a fan of ghee. If you're new to the gluten-free diet, ghee is clarified butter, okay, and it's supposed to have most of the protein removed, which is why so many people believe it's safe. Dairy, on the other hand, is the full deal, right? Whether you're talking about ghee or whether you're talking about dairy, one of the problems with them is most forms of ghee and dairy come from A1 cows. There's a protein in them called A1 casein, and this can mimic gluten. And if you're gluten sensitive and you're eating a lot of dairy that comes from A1 types of casein, then that can be a problem for you, for some of you, okay? And there are lots of problems with dairy, but this is arguably one of the biggest, especially in industrialized countries where all the cows, that's what they produce. They're A1 cows, they produce A1 casein. A1 is the delineation for the type of casein that these animals produce. And so you don't want that. You don't want that because we know A1 casein is linked to autoimmunity. Now, that being said, what else could we be worried about with dairy? A lot of it is the way it's processed, the way the cows are fed, the way the cows are cared for, and the way the milk is processed. It's, if you've ever been on a farm or owned an animal and owned a farm and then go to a commercial farm, you'll see the vast difference between how the animals are cared for, how they're fed. And if you think that stress and poor diet affects your health poorly, what about animals, right? And if you eat the milk from animals that are not taken very good care of, you're eating food that isn't healthy. We can call it milk all we want, but what it is it's the food from the teat of another animal who was also sick. And so again, you can't get healthy eating animals that are unhealthy or eating animal byproducts that are unhealthy. That's why it's so important to know where your food comes from and how it was taken care of. Linda's asking, so the vertigo that I deal with could be related to gluten as opposed to my sinuses? Absolutely. This is what I was referring to earlier, Linda, with cerebellar ataxia. That is a form of dizziness and loss of balance that gluten can induce. Is regular white vinegar unsafe? Where do I find vinegar-free pickles? You make them. Make your own pickles. That's the easiest way to find it. Regular white vinegar is typically made from corn. And so if you're following a true gluten-free diet, you don't want that. You want to probably make and pickle your own. Now, corn, a lot of it is GMO, right? And a lot of it contains glyphosate, which is one of the big reasons why. You'd want to absolutely avoid that white vinegar. But not all companies produce their white vinegar from corn. So depending on the company, you might also call that company that produces that pickle that you might want to eat and ask them where they derive their vinegar, because some companies don't produce white vinegar from corn. But there are alternatives. There's plum vinegar, wine vinegar, apple cider vinegar, balsamic vinegar. So a lot of vinegar alternatives that you can use although I wouldn't recommend balsamic and pickling, you could probably use an apple cider pretty decently well, or plum. Let's see here. Can MS be linked to non-celiac gluten sensitivity? It absolutely can, Helena. As a matter of fact, go over to Gluten Free Society and just type in multiple sclerosis in the search box. You'll see an interview I've done with Dr. Terry Walls, who was in a wheelchair before she discovered diet change. And we talk about her story and how she actually got out of her wheelchair, and today she enjoys vibrant health without MS. So it very much can be linked to gluten sensitivity. Back it up just a little bit. Oh, keep going down. So somebody says, I need more convincing to go off dairy. If you need more convincing, go check out my video on gluten versus dairy and get all the convincing that you'll need. Let's see, go back up. Here we go. I like that. Kate says, huge difference. My celiac disease was missed because my symptoms were not typical. Both of my sisters have celiac disease. Neither of those two have the vertigo. Most of their symptoms were gastric. So that's what we were alluding to earlier when we were talking about atypical symptoms. So what would I buy when I'm celiac? Rosemarie is asking. So Rosemarie, the best thing to buy, honestly, the best place to start is either the Glutenology Masterclass, because it's not about what you buy, it's about how you get educated. When you get educated, then what you buy becomes relative. Number two, get a copy of No Grain, No Pain, from the bookstore, from the library, and start following the phase 1 and phase 2 diet. But the book also has a meal plan. It has lots of recipes, so it'll help you navigate, at least initially as you're getting educated, what you can buy in terms of groceries, etc. Let's see, Kathy, I recently saw a pasta product made with 100% yellow peas. What's my opinion on that? Any product that's highly processed, that's a gluten-free or grain-free substitute, I would just simply say be cautious. Do not introduce those things as primary staple foods in your diet. When you're gluten-free, don't look for all of the substitute foods to eat all the time. If you have it on occasion, it's probably not going to be a big deal unless you're allergic to the peas. But also make sure you read the ingredients of the box, because there may be other ingredients in that pasta that are taboo or that aren't good for you. So that, again, it comes back to label reading and knowing what you're eating. Let's see, how does gluten affect the pancreas? Well, I've seen cases of pancreatitis, swelling of the pancreas, inflammation of the pancreas, destruction of the pancreas. It can also cause pancreatic insufficiency. So remember, aside from the fact that the pancreas generates insulin, which helps regulate blood sugar, it also produces digestive enzymes, and those digestive enzymes help you break your food down. If you have pancreatic insufficiency as a result of gluten-induced damage, then your digestion suffers. That means you become malnourished, and your problems can mount on top of just gluten. Patty's asking about psyllium fiber. Psyllium's okay. Psyllium's a good form of fiber. It's a good form of gluten-free fiber. We actually have a product called Ultra Fiber, Patty, that has psyllium, and it has some other root-based fibers in it, as well as some acacia gum, which is a good form of fiber to help feed the microbiome. It's especially helpful for newbies going on a gluten-free diet who are just paralyzed. They don't know where to start, and they need to get some fiber in their diet. It's a good source of fiber to add to a smoothie. Do we need to be concerned if something is gluten-free but made in a facility that manufactures other products containing gluten? Yes, especially if you're still struggling. If you're still struggling and you don't know why, but you're buying food products that are manufactured in the same facility, you could be getting cross-contamination, and that may be one of the reasons why you're struggling. Yeah, so Jenny's asking, is meat glue added into all types of gluten-free food, even those that are not including meat? Yes. Meat glue is a pink slime created from a type of bacteria called Streptovirilium, and it's used in making imitation meats, things like hot dogs, luncheon meats, imitation crab meat, etc. But it's also used in dairy products, and it's used in a lot of the gluten-free food products to bring the same texture and mouthfeel to the product. So again, meat glue, it's a texture issue. It makes things gluey and chewy, and it sticks them together. Dustin, will pressure cooking foods neutralize lectins? It does to a certain extent. Pressure cooking also can neutralize oxalates, and it can neutralize phytates. So pressure cooking is not a bad practice if you're struggling with digestive issues. Is oral lichen planus a nutritional deficiency? It can be exacerbated by nutritional deficiency, but oral lichen planus is, in my experience, usually fungal. What test would you ask for thyroid and hidden allergy problems? Layla wants to know. So thyroid testing, simple. You want to get comprehensive. So the basic test that your doctor can run, simply put TSH, T4, T3, and you want free and bound when you're getting these measured. And then reverse T3, which is a mirror image of T3 that doesn't work. But the regular T3 doesn't differentiate how much of that is reverse T3. You also want to look at some of the nutritional pieces, iodine, vitamin B2, vitamin C is important, selenium, magnesium, B12, vitamin D. We could go on the thyroid because there's just a lot of biochemistry behind the thyroid. Omega-3 fats. These are all essential to the proper operation of thyroid hormone. And this is the fundamental problem that most doctors make when they're evaluating a person's thyroid. You go to an endocrinologist, most of them measure TSH, which is made by your brain. It's made by your pituitary gland. It's not even your thyroid hormone. It's a hormone that helps regulate your thyroid hormone. This is made by your thyroid. And the iodine is the 4, and the tyrosine is something else that should be measured. Tyrosine is the backbone, the amino acid backbone. The T is made out of tyrosine. Those are 4 molecules of iodine, right? And so, again, most doctors fail because they stop right here, only at the brain regulatory hormone, but they don't understand the biochemistry behind the nutrition of how thyroid is not only produced, how it's managed, how it travels through the bloodstream, how it activates the DNA. Those all require vitamins and minerals. So if you're really doing a proper assessment of the thyroid, you've got to get a proper assessment of your nutritional status. As far as hidden allergy problems, it's not one test. It's multiple types of tests to measure because there's different ways people can react, and all those different ways need to be measured. Okay, let's go down the list here. So yeah, this is just pinning off that question. Esther's talking about IgG and IgA, food reactivity. I tested positive for a lot of foods. IgG and IgA are not accurate ways to assess for food allergies, and if that's what you're being measured for, you're going to get a lot of false positives, and you're going to have a lot more food restriction than maybe what you need, and that sometimes creates a lot of frustration for people in their diet. Let's keep scrolling down. Do you think that Bell's palsy is caused by a non-gluten-free diet? It can be. I've seen cases of Bell's palsy reversed. Not all cases of Bell's palsy are gluten-induced. I've seen them be virally induced. I've seen them be nutritionally deficit-induced. So going back to what I said earlier, can I recommend a good book to buy for the true gluten-free diet? I'm glad you asked, Tammy. No Grain, No Pain. It's the only book to buy. If you want to know how to navigate the gluten-free diet, it's the only book to buy. Everybody else talks about, corn, rice, and other grain-based substitutes that make you sick or keep you sick, but No Grain, No Pain does not. So I'm partial. Maybe I'm a little biased, but it was a book written on 20 years of experience. Let's see here. Pardik says, since 2017 gluten-free, but I had to give up beer. Are there any beers that I could enjoy once in a while? Oh man, I wish. I give up beer too, so I'm right there with you. It is something that I miss. But what I do instead is I actually did a whole series on gluten-free alcohol. And so, again, it's not a beer. It's not going to be the same, but I do a nice organic potato vodka or a nice organic potato rum, and a little fresh squeezed pineapple juice. and I have in a little seltzer water, little Pellegrino or bubbly water in that, and that's what if I'm going to imbibe in a spirit, that's what I'll use and make sure that I stay gluten-free. But there aren't any beers, not really. I mean, unless you want to do meads, and then, like the best one is honey mead, but it's too sweet. If you want a beer, that's not going to cut it. So honey mead is not a bad option. And then now they're making these ciders, right? Hard ciders. And those aren't a bad option, but again, they're not the same thing if you're looking for that, for that hoppy flavor of beer. Where you got to be real careful with these is when they add all the natural flavors to them. The ingredients sometimes are a way that manufacturers mask corn. So you've got to just be, you've got to call the manufacturer and say, hey, is your natural flavor, is your peach natural flavor, is your blueberry natural flavor, is it actually blueberries or is it, corn derivative? And get that answer before you try to take it on. What about nutritional yeast to replace dairy cheese? You can. It's just not one I would recommend as a staple food. Again, if you had it on occasion, it's probably not the deal breaker to your health. But if you're using nutritional yeast day in, day out, it's not as healthy as what most people think it is. Yeah, so Danielle is asking about why monk fruit has erythritol. I don't know why they add erythritol to it. That, in my opinion, is a bad move on their part. It's one of the reasons why I prefer, as a sweetener, I prefer birchwood xylitol, if you tolerate it. Birch xylitol, derived from birch. Otherwise, if I'm going to use a sweetener, if I'm going to get sweet, maple, honey's not a bad option, although there's a lot of fructose in it, so if you don't tolerate fructose well, some people don't tolerate xylitol well, some people don't tolerate honey well because of the fructose. Maple's usually better tolerated, but it's super sweet. And, if you're adding maple to everything you eat and cook, that's not necessarily a great idea either. So, again, with sweet, everybody looks to safe or natural sweetener alternatives, and my advice is, learn that a piece of fruit is dessert. Right? Readjust your habits as opposed to trying to add sweet to everything that you eat that doesn't naturally taste sweet. And you'll be, your taste buds will change. When your taste buds change, you'll detect sweet in broccoli. That's how sensitive your taste buds can get if you give an opportunity to dial it in. Let's see here. Yeah, so Angela says that she's having psoriasis flares and body inflammation, going gluten sensitive, and wondering if those symptoms can resurge when somebody's going on the diet and doing a detoxification. Yes, you can detoxify when you're going gluten-free, especially if you have weight to lose. A lot of people don't realize it, but they have what's known as what I call angry fat. And so what happens is you change your diet and you have angry fat, and angry fat stores inflammatory toxins. And so when you change your diet to a non-inflammatory diet, these toxins can drip out of your fat and they can flare you. And sometimes that flare can be a couple of weeks. And this is one of the things that happens when people go gluten-free. If they hit that flare, if they get that side effect, they quit the diet because they think the diet was hurting them, but in effect, it was just toxic burden being released from their fat cells as a result of the change in their diet, causing, the flare-up in symptoms. Now, some people also experience a flare-up in symptoms for a different reason. So not this reason, but because gluten proteins have opiate properties. So they actually they're pain relievers. Opiates are natural pain relievers, and so when you cut those glutens out of your diet, you're cutting those opiates out of your diet. And if you were using there's a research study published a number of years ago that showed how gluten could mask its own toxicity, because the opiates naturally found in gluten-based food can actually work as a pain reliever, blocking the inflammation that the gluten causes, thus you don't feel it. So when you change your diet, you actually go through drug withdrawals and increase pain as a result of opiate withdrawal. So there's a couple of different ways that can happen. Everybody always wants to know what I eat in a day. What did I eat today? Let's see. I didn't eat breakfast. So I usually fast for about 16 to 18 hours. So I intermittent fast pretty much most days, minus holidays where I just want to eat a little bit more. But my first meal of the day is usually whatever I had for dinner the night before. So, last night I had turkey, and I had that with some green beans. And what else did we have with that? I had some green beans, and then I had some potato. It was a potato mash. And we actually over the weekend we butchered one of our own turkeys, so it was a good meal. And I had that again. I had that for lunch today. And then tonight, I don't know what I'm going to have. I'm going to have whatever my wife cooks, which is probably going to be some type of meat, some type of vegetable or two or three. And that's a wrap. But that's pretty much what I eat most days is I eat meat, vegetables. Usually I'll eat an apple in a day. I'll eat, fruit as it's in season. Right now, berries are coming in season. My blueberries are getting ready to explode in my garden. So I'm going to be eating blueberries probably for the next few months, blueberries and strawberries. Hopefully we'll get some elderberry this year as well. But fruit in season, but not abundantly so. I mean, I'm not a big fan of eating the whole watermelon, if that makes sense. I believe that fruit should be eaten in moderation, but it's a good source of nourishment. And then nuts, just depending on what you like and what you have the room for in your diet. But I like almonds. I have 27 pecan trees, so pecans are a lot of what I eat too, because I have such an abundance of them. So. Just depends on what you like. I mean, eating should be always real food. Again, focus on real food and not processing. And when you can control your food, then it gets really, really easy to eliminate the food that you feel like might be hurting you, because you don't have to think about, was it the food, or was it the chemicals added to the food, or was it the processing mechanism behind the food, or was it where the food was processed that was contaminated with gluten and other grains. So hopefully that's helpful for you. Can gluten sensitivity cause rheumatoid arthritis? Andrea wants to know. Andrea, Ginger, who I wrote about in my book, No Grain, No Pain, had terminal juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. And that's how we saved her life. We saved her life by taking her gluten-free. So to answer your question, can gluten cause rheumatoid arthritis? The answer is absolutely yes. Let's scroll down on the right as well. So somebody says, I feel like when I suggest the gluten-free diet, people think I'm trying to make them join my misfortune. I think attitude is everything. I mean, is it misfortunate to feel good? Is it misfortunate to be healthy? I think, when people ask me, how do you do it? It's so hard. I say, I do it. I can function. I mean, I'm 50 years old and I can function. I can run. I can CrossFit. I can play with my kids. I can play with my dog. I'm not limited. I'm not hindered physically, and I'm not hindered mentally or emotionally with chronic illness. And I'm not hammered chemically with medicine to treat that chronic illness. To me, that's not misfortune at all. I'd argue the opposite. People that, take their poor diet and then they medicate it with Tums and Rolaids or other antacids. They medicate their chronic illness with some drug that's designed to suppress their pain because they're not paying attention to the way they treat their body. To me, that's miserable, and that's misfortune, is to be oblivious to the fact that all you have to do is make change. And then really, truly, it's your obligation to make that change. And if you're not willing to do it, then you deserve the disease that is inhabiting your body. And I don't mean that to say, I don't mean that to be mean. I just say, look, it's up to you. Your body is your body. It's your ultimate responsibility. It's the only thing you have. It's non-negotiable and non-returnable, and you can't just replace parts. You've got to take care of it. And so that means you've got to learn to take care of it, because every commercial coming your way, every piece of information coming your way, whether it's through radio, print, TV, or other forms of media, is all designed to sell you garbage for the most part. There aren't very many mediums that are just designed to educate you so that you can be empowered to make a better choice. It's why I do this show and spend so much time with you guys every Monday. It's because I want to educate you more than anything else, because I know that if you're empowered to make meaningful change, then you don't have to rely on all the other nonsense, garbage, and marketing tactics of other people who are just looking to lift your wallet and make it a little bit lighter without actually truly helping you. Love that. I love that. I know things, I sow things, I grow things. I'm non-celiac, gluten sensitive. I've been damaging my gut and skin my whole life. I'm gluten-free and healing now, 2 weeks in. That's how fast, 2 weeks in. Notice she didn't say I'm healed now. She says I'm healing now. Your body knows how. You just have to quit interfering with it. Let's see. Giant wants to know, is avenine in oats as deleterious as gluten? I believe so. And I've got research that would indicate that it is. I know the oat people would probably argue with me, but that's their right. That's their, that's their prerogative. But they're trying to sell you oatmeal, and I'm not. Dr. Peter, why is it so hard to find someone to talk about how to be grain-free intermittent fasting and maintain your weight? So much talk about losing weight, but I don't want to lose any more. Why is it hard? I don't know. That's a good question, TC. I think it's hard because most of the people talking about health and fitness aren't healthy and they're not fit. And, it's kind of like, why is it hard to find, somebody who can give you good financial advice if they're not wealthy? How is it good to, my point is that the advice that you're seeking from the individual that you're seeking it from, that individual should be an expert in whatever that is. And that not only should they be an expert in knowledge, but they should be an expert in personal application of that knowledge, because knowledge without application is useless, right? And knowledge without application, if somebody's saying, do as I say, not as I do, it's not believable. That's why I can get up here week after week, and I don't come from the perspective of being obese or having skin rashes or, having obvious, mega problems. And that's, it's important that I take care of myself if I'm going to get up here and preach and try to help you guys understand how to take care of yourself. Oats technically do contain gluten, so that was a secondary comment. Oats contain avenine, and that is a form of gluten, and it has been shown in research studies to cause damage to many people with gluten sensitivity. So I would argue that the people that say that the oats that cause damage are cross-contaminated, they're not even looking at the avenine studies that we know avenine can do damage. So I would say they're misleading. Let's see, scroll down on the right for me. Jill says, I have had gut pain off and on. Several years went gluten-free, dairy intolerant, so I stay clear too. Had my gallbladder removed and allergies ramped too. Doctor recommended a colonoscopy to check for things. What can they find by that? If you're doing all those things and you're still struggling, you probably really need to get with somebody. I mean, a scope can be helpful. You may have a problem that's physically observable. I think the question is that you should ask your doctor is, if you do a scope, what are the potential things you might find? And if you find those things, what would you do if I have them? I mean, I had a woman come see me this morning, and her doctor said, we want to do a scope because we think there may be scar tissue. I'm thinking, okay, well, what if you do have scar tissue? What do you do if a gut has scar tissue? How do you heal it? There's not a drug that heals scar tissue. There's no treatment. So why go through the trouble of a scope if scar tissue is your greatest concern? In that case, it didn't make a whole lot of sense. In your case, it may make perfect sense to get a scope. So again, I think you just got to get granular with your questioning to your doctor. Let's see here. Are distilled alcohols gluten-free? Technically they're supposed to be, Carol, but I've seen too many people in my 20 years of experience reacting to them. The other part of that is most alcohols today are derivative of highly, highly processed grain. Remember the way that grain is grown? It's grown, some of them are GMO, genetically modified. Some of them are loaded with glyphosate and other pesticides. So what you get is a high chemical residue alcohol that's not good for you. Alcohol is already not good for you. Not that you can't have a drink once in a while or now and again, but daily use of alcohol. So remember, alcohol is a liver poison, and when you add glyphosate and other pesticides to it, you can run into a problem. But as far as gluten is concerned, if it's made of grain, I don't recommend it. Not on the true gluten-free diet. How long does it take for a flare to go away? It depends. It's different in different people, and it depends on what else you're doing that might be exacerbating that flare. So, generally speaking, you'll notice a change or an improvement within a couple of months when you really truly get your diet granular and dialed in. If you're not noticing an improvement, then you should seek help. Don't go it alone. Scroll down on the left. How many fruits and vegetable servings do you eat per day? It's always got to be how many. I don't count. Why don't I count? Because I eat and I let my body tell me when I'm full. So I might even sit down to a full plate and not eat everything that's on my plate. That's why I have a compost. because anything I don't eat goes back to making soil to grow the next thing. But I don't really count. I mean, fruits and vegetables, probably somewhere in the neighborhood of anywhere between 5 and 10 a day would probably be most days pretty accurate. Do almonds suppress the thyroid? No, not particularly. Oh, I like this. When you want dessert, what do you eat? For me, generally speaking, I eat fruit when I want dessert. Fruit, I especially in the summer months, there's a lot of really good fruit that I like, cantaloupe and watermelon and blueberries and strawberries. You know, fruit is a great dessert. If I really, really have a sweet tooth, I sometimes will eat a little dried mango, but not much, because a little goes a long way. But, you know, everybody's taste is relative. Everybody's different in that way. Let's scroll down on both sides. Kelly wants to know, do I have any supplements I'd recommend for dealing with angry fat? Yeah, vitamin C. Vitamin C, hands down. Detox C, best thing you can take. I have posterior uveitis in both eyes and lots of floaters and cells in visual field following the no grain, no pain eating plan. Awesome. Let us know. Come back and let us know how that does for your uveitis. I actually had a case one time, a woman came in to see me. They were injecting steroid into her eyeball for her uveitis, and of course we were able to completely reverse the need for steroids or any eye damage that would come from uveitis. So her condition actually went into full remission once we figured out gluten was a major part of her problem. Nevin wants to know most accurate test to look for gluten sensitivity. Genetics, Nevin, or Nevine. I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, but genetic testing. We can throw a link up if you want to do genetic testing. Check it out. It's the best way to get to identify whether or not you need to be on a gluten-free diet. Love that. Somebody said off all meds, going gluten-free. Love hearing those transition stories. That's wonderful. Are my talks archived? Yes, Judith, and you can watch. We've got 1,000 or more video shows that you can have access to. You just got to go over to glutenfreesociety.org and subscribe to our newsletter. And you can also check out our video blog and our blog section on Gluten Free Society while you're there. And all of our stuff is archived there. So you just got to peruse through it. How do I feel about hemp seeds? I'm okay with hemp seeds. I don't have a problem with them. Where you have to be careful with seeds is a general rule of thumb. I talk about this in No Grain, No Pain, is that seeds can be difficult to digest. So a lot of you that have, years of gluten-induced GI dysfunction, if you're throwing all kinds of seeds into your diet, they're hard to digest. So when your gut's trying to recover, sometimes seed avoidance helps expedite that process a little bit more quickly. So where you got to be worried about seeds is when you struggle with gut dysfunction. Let's see here. How much vitamin C for angry fat? 5 grams. 5 grams a day or bowel tolerance. And everybody's bowel tolerance is different, but if you take too much vitamin C, your bowels will start gurgling and you'll have loose stools. So the way you take vitamin C is take 1 gram at a time and take it over the course of the day. So take several doses. Take 1 gram every several hours. That's probably the most effective way to take vitamin C if you're struggling with angry fat issues and you're looking for a way to support your body through that. Muscle spasms, yeah, electrolyte imbalance, either potassium, calcium, magnesium, or just overall dehydration, probably the top things that I would say create spasms for people. Outside of that, Isaiah, caffeine, overabundance of caffeine. If you drink more than a cup of coffee or more than a couple of cups of tea in a day, that'll hammer your muscles. Your muscles can't handle the quantity of caffeine without going into spasm. Should Hashimoto's thyroiditis patients be grain-free? Hashimoto's patients should all be tested for gluten sensitivity, Carol. I can't answer should all of them be grain-free because I haven't seen them all in my practice. But the ones I have seen, there's a strong likelihood of gluten sensitivity with Hashimoto's. And there's a lot of really great research showing that gluten antibodies and thyroid antibodies both reduce when people with Hashimoto's get on a true gluten-free diet. Okay, take a couple of more here. Stan says, if I get your book, No Grain, No Pain, is that everything I need to know about going gluten-free? I'm a newbie. Yeah, it is. I mean, Stan, you can always learn more, but it's a really great master plan synopsis for you to dive in. I'd say there's the two resources that you'd get the most out of if you want to know hey, just what do I need to do and why? No Grain, No Pain is a great fit. If you want to know all the intrinsic science and details, check out my Glutenology Masterclass. It's 14 hours and there's a lot of deep science in that class. So it just depends on your learning style. For some people, that deeper science deters them at first because they need to just know fundamentally what the basics are. So it just depends on, if you're a newbie, Stan, No Grain, No Pain probably be a better fit for you. Jenny, if one is a celiac that often cannot process nutrients in the gut, does this mean that taking tablets may not be beneficial? No. As a matter of fact, the great thing about if your gut's broken from gluten is that if you take supplements in higher quantities, you can actually overcome some of that gut damage and you can get absorption of those nutrients through something called passive absorption or passive diffusion. So that's the good thing. That's why it's not hopeless to take vitamins. Anytime, I hear this a lot from other doctors. It's, taking vitamins is creating expensive urine. Doctors that say that truly are moronic in their knowledge of biochemistry. If they're saying that, it's just out of ignorance more than anything else. So, so I think we covered a lot of them. Gosh, it keeps coming in, but we're 20 minutes over here. Others here and in Spain say that there is not enough evidence. They don't like us to recommend healthy eating and eliminating gluten and casein and all the others. They treat us as if we were cuckoo. Yeah, that's unfortunate. It's not different here in the U.S. I'm oftentimes referred to as a renegade quack. One guy one time made a video wishing I would die in a fiery car crash because I altered his perception of what the gluten-free diet needed to look like. I've had a number of people, try to incriminate me as a result of being honest. Look, honesty, in reality, honesty doesn't create lifelong customers. And that's why, when you've got government entities and you've got other people saying, hey, there's not enough evidence, generally it's not because there's not enough evidence. I mean, if we look at how many research studies have now been done on gluten sensitivity and non-celiac gluten sensitive illnesses, we're talking about tens of thousands of research studies in a matter of the last 20 years alone. So to say there's not enough research means that they're doing what we call picking and choosing. They're picking the research and they're cherry picking what they want to see and what they want to read and coming out with the conclusion that they'd like, as opposed to looking at the science in its entirety and intelligently analyzing the science for what it is, the flaws, the pitfalls, and the need for additional research studies. And there's something that's dying in the world these days is science. I mean, look at the pandemic and the way it was handled, very non-scientifically. Look at the way medicine is handled today. We've got more people taking more drugs than ever before, yet we have more disease, more chronic degeneration, more autoimmunity than ever before. So if medicine were the answer to that problem, wouldn't you think at least the research, according to the research, medicine is the answer and disease should be gone, but it isn't. So the empirical evidence of the outcomes of actually applying medicine to chronic disease doesn't lead to disease remission, doesn't lead to diseases being less common, and doesn't lead to less death. So, why? Question that. Question it all. Question me. Question your doctor. Learn to question, learn to be inquisitive. That's how you're going to find your way to good health. All right, I think we got to wrap it up. I got to go home and eat dinner. It's been fun. It's been a great evening. Hey, those of you who are new to the show, maybe this is the first time you've come over and checked us out, make sure you subscribe. Come visit me at glutenfreesociety.org. It's free. Sign up for our newsletter. We'll send you all kinds of free information on how to navigate the gluten-free diet and help you try to find your way toward a healthier lifestyle. Make sure you subscribe as well to our YouTube channel if you're watching on YouTube, and to our Facebook group if you're on our Facebook channel tonight. That way you'll get notified when we go live, and that way you won't miss a show. We're here every Monday night minus vacation. I will not miss a Monday unless life or limb are involved, or unless I'm taking some deserved time off. So We'll see you back here next Monday night for another episode of Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain. Bring me your toughest questions. Invite your best friends, your family, your loved ones. Remember what we're about. It's saving 100 million lives. I can't do that without you spreading the word. So have a great week, and we'll see you next Monday. Hey, don't forget to tune in next week, same time, 6 p.m. Central Standard Time, for another Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain show. Bring all your toughest health questions to me. I look forward to answering them. And before you leave today, make sure you hit subscribe. And once you do, click that bell. That bell is going to allow us to remind you right before we go live. But it's also going to allow us to remind you when we come out with other video content all week long. We've got lots of episodes coming your way all week long, and I don't want you to miss anything. So again, subscribe, hit that bell so that you can get notified when we have that new information put up for you. Thanks so much, and I'm wishing you excellent health. Have a great week. We'll see you next Monday night.